Respected Joshi John sir, Dr. Ramachandran, Academic Coordinator Pidambaran, my dear teachers, friends, welcome to ASGK MGR monthly grand rounds for the month of November 2020. In the last meeting, it was decided to start off the program with a quick quiz, a single question. Regards from the entire team of Gokulam Medical College as well as GG Hospital. Thanks to the team. And please go through these guidelines for the quiz. Only one question, complete details in a single slide. So only one slide for the question. Type your answer. It may be one word or a phrase in the Zoom chat box as personal message to Quizmaster. That is Arun Kumar ML. Not as a message to all. As soon as possible. Time is important. Only one prize. The first correct answer in the personal chat box will get it. Result will be announced at the end of academic discussion. Quizmaster's decision will be final. Right now, please open your Zoom chat box. Select Arun Kumar ML to message personally. So everything clear? Dr. Ramachandran and Pidambaran?
Privately.
Yeah, privately. Dr. Ramachandran and Pidambaran, can I start the question?
Yes, you can start.
Is it clear? The method of answering?
Yeah, clear.
Open the Zoom chat box. Select Arun Kumar ML to write your answer as a type your answer and send it as a personal message. The first correct answer in the personal message group will get it. Please note, it is a personal message to the Quizmaster, not message to all. So the only question, comment on this video image. The comment has to be complete. I've requested all my team members in Gokulam as well as GG not to attempt this quiz for today. Comment on this video image.
Arun, first share screen cheyum.
Sorry. So only one question. Type your answer as one word or phrase in the Zoom chat box as personal message to Quizmaster. Okay. Now it's okay.
Okay.
Can you see?
Okay.
Okay. Just comment on this video image. It may be a single word or a phrase. Basically, findings. Pidambaran, do I need to play it again or?
Yeah, play it again.
I think it's clear. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Back to Dr. Peethambaran and academic coordinators.
Thank you, Arun, for the cues. Now we will start with the academic session. I am inviting our senior professor, Professor MP Sri Jain, to moderate this session. Over to you, sir.
A very good evening to all. Mr. President Joshi, Ramachandran, Peethambaran, and Shubhlal sir, and all other teachers and my dear friends. We are going to listen from Matthew regarding a rare reason for stricture of the esophagus. A lot of common reasons, but he is going to present a rare case. And Matthew, please start the presentation.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Our today's case discussion for grand rounds is about an interesting case about rare cause of benign esophageal stricture. I'm Dr. Matthews from Department of GI Surgery, Amartha Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi. So this is a patient who's a 46-year-old perimenopausal woman with no known comorbidities. Her history dates back to 2005 when she first started to have dysphagia. To describe the dysphagia, initially it was recurrent for solids, then it progressively increased. And over a period of time, when she ended up in June 2010 in our hospital, she had significant distressing dysphagia when she can eat only semi-solids and liquids alone, with significant loss of weight. After coming here on probing her history, there was no history of any prolonged dyspeptic symptoms, or there was no history of any hematemesis mellitus. There was no history of even any intake or ingestion of traumatizing substances, and no history of allergic history either. The only positive history was significant loss of weight, but there was no loss of appetite even. Her clinical examination was unremarkable except for her thin build because of the loss of weight over a prolonged period of dysphagia. In this background, as the patient was just 35 years old, that is 10 years back in June 2010, we evaluated the patients in terms of patient having dysphagia. The initial evaluation with the basic blood investigations turned out to be normal. So we went in to do for a OGD scopy and a barium swallow study. I was lucky enough to get this barium swallow study from my system that was taken 10 years back. It showed two strictures, one at the initial portion of the esophagus and one more stricture at 23 centimeters from the incisors. OGD scopy finding showed a cervical esophageal web that was dilated with the guide wire using controlled radial expansion balloon up to 12 millimeters, and the other stricture was also dilated. The other finding being that the esophagus looked grossly normal, except for some epithelium gets peeled off with minimal pressure given to it. So multiple biopsies was taken near the stricture area and the other epithelial peeling off areas. The biopsy was reported to have no malignancy and there was no significant finding either. Patient after this reporting to the gastro-medicine didn't come back. She just got her report as non-malignancy, so she didn't follow properly in the gastro-medicine department. But the story didn't end there. She again had dysphagia significantly when she reached in February 2014 again to gastro-medicine department, with now having dysphagia to the sort that she could eat only, she could drink only liquids, not even semi-solids now. So to our findings, again OGD scopy was done. This time there was a little more information we could get from the OGD scopy, which showed some sloughing mucosa from the esophagus, which was more evident than the previous study. This time also there was two strictures which was dilated up to 11 millimeters. And this friable mucosa with peeling off throughout the esophagus, biopsies were again taken. This time we are lucky enough to have one more finding that when she was admitted, she had multiple skin lesions. These are bullous lesions that were easily breakable. So we could take biopsy from this lesion also. So going on with the esophagus OGD finding and the biopsy reports. The esophageal biopsy report reported as fragmented strips of parakeratotic stratified squamous epithelium, intraepithelial neutrophils in few fragments, no necrosis or basal acculation. And comparing with the biopsy report of the bullous lesion over the skin, it showed epidermis with hemorrhagic bullous, which appears intraepidermally and focal suprabasal and subcorneal regions. There is necrosis of cells in the roof. Superficial dermis showed intense infiltration of lymphocytes and eosinophils. Dermis was edematous. Immunofluorescence study was conducted as these were features of skin lesion which was in between pemphigus and pemphigoid, but the immunofluorescence study was inconclusive. So along with these findings, with OGD scopy findings, with the biopsy report from the esophagus and from the skin, working diagnosis of esophagitis superficialis dissecans with associated pemphigoid lesion of skin was given. So basic literature says this esophagitis superficialis dissecans, which presents as dysphagia, usually settles down with steroids. So she was put up on steroids and was on dermatology follow-up for the pemphigoid lesion of the skin. The skin lesion subsided within a week, and the patient also clinically improved with the steroids for dysphagia also. So from 2014, she again didn't turn up to the hospital for a long time, but her course of illness was not so smooth as expected with steroids. After that, she ended up in the hospital at around 2017. So again with dysphagia, same complaint. So this time from 2017 to 2019, there were multiple episodes. She came to the hospital with dysphagia, and multiple times we did esophageal dilatation, but it failed to improve. So this made her quality of life extremely distressing. She had significant loss of weight, and her BMI during 2019 was just below 15. She was very thin built, just 30 to 35 kgs weight. So to improve her nutritionally first, when she was referred to us to the GI surgery department, we opted her to undergo feeding jejunostomy to start her on nutrition. So by keeping, we did a feeding jejunostomy, and she gained little weight on feeding jejunostomy. But now the background of 15 years, from 2005 to almost 2019 end, she has multiple episodes of failed dilatation. It was a very long duration of history. Multiple times biopsy done. Each time the biopsy did not show any feature of malignancy. There was no response to steroids even. Not completely no response to steroids. She was also not compliant to steroids. And this recurrent strictures was causing her significant distress to the life that she cannot eat whatever she likes. So we counseled the patient and the bystanders regarding this long history and what else option can we give her to improve her quality of life and to make her happy for further future life, because she was just 46 years when she came in 2019. So on discussion with the patient and the bystanders, initially we thought whether we could give some more benefit of doing a surgery. If surgery, then we thought what surgery we could take her up. As the patient had multiple dilatations in the esophagus, and at the last 2-3 dilatations was commented as to be very difficult by the endoscopist, we thought that doing an esophagectomy in a patient with a BMI, with a very low BMI, will be very difficult and putting her more on a life risk for having a non-malignant disease taking up for esophagectomy. So we thought that we should give her an alternative bypass route for the conduit to bypass this strictured esophagus. So when coming to the next step of thinking of which conduit to be taken, the stomach conduit may not reach so high because the initial stricture was so high at the upper esophagus. So we thought that colonic conduit would be more benefit for the patient. So with all this idea and discussing with the patient that this is an option for her to improve the quality of life, we took her up for the surgery. So before surgery, she underwent all usual pre-op evaluation with basic workup, anesthesia clearance, and CT angiogram to look at the vasculature of the colonic anatomy and to look up the mucosal pattern of the colon with a colonoscopy. So everything turned out to be normal, and she was taken up for surgery in April 2020. So as expected, while opening up the neck and exploring, there was a stricture almost up at the upper esophageal level. So we were forced to do anastomosis at around just below the piriform recess in the lower pharynx. Abdomen part, while opening the abdomen, there was some adhesions due to the previous feeding jejunostomy, and the vascular anatomy of the colon was defined. So initially, we made a midline laparotomy incision. We mobilized the colon, right colon, the transverse colon, the sigmoid up to the sigmoid colon with the vasculature intact. We stripped off the omentum carefully away from the transverse colon. So then when we found the middle, as we already thought, we were in the idea that we would take the left colic artery based conduit. So initially only we put a bulldog clamp over this middle colic pedicle to check whether the pulsation is there. So while this reconditioning would happen, I just remember what my consultant taught me during this, that the most important thing while doing a conduit is that to provide an adequate blood supply and to make the conduit such that its transport function is adequately normal. So for getting a adequate blood supply for the conduit, the major points what he taught me was that we should preserve this ascending branch of left colic artery and all the marginal arteries and the veins so that there is adequate vascular supply and venous drainage. We should try to clamp the middle colic trunk as close to its origin as possible so that we can preserve the right and left branching arcades so that the vascularity may be maintained. And while dividing the distal portion of the colon, we need not divide the mesocolon or the marginal arteries here so that we don't get an ischemic patch here. The other 2 points were after mobilizing and taking the conduit above to the neck level, we should check if it is a substernal route, is there any kink that is between the diaphragm and the xiphoid process, where the kink should be released by putting some small incisions in the diaphragm. The last point being, if above all these, if the colon looks ischemic or not in a good condition, then it is better to leave the colon there and go for a second stage surgery, because vascularity is the most important factor for maintaining the conduit health. So after this fashioning of the conduit, the main steps of fashioning of the conduit we followed was that we picked up the transverse colon just at the tethering point of the ascending branch of left colic artery, and we made it to sit on the xiphoid process here so that to measure the length, and we made the first stitch there, marked it. After this marking, that is almost here near the xiphoid process level, we took an umbilical tape, we measured the length, approximate length of conduit which is needed up to the neck anastomosis. With the umbilical tape, then we measured again how much length of the proximal thing we needed. So after this, we marked another point here, another stitch here, so that we could resect this portion and take the conduit above. So after being done this, we made our proximal cut here after measuring with the umbilical tape. After incising this way, like with preserving the vascularity of the left ascending colic branch of left colic artery, we guided the colon up to the neck and saw whether the length is okay. Next, the most important thing was to guide this colon in the substernal route as we already planned. Initially, what we did was we put a long Kelly's forceps substernally and guided up to this, where from here we took a gauze, railroaded it up to this, and made a good space for the conduit to sit there. So, as I already said, the two most important things to be noted while doing a conduit is one is blood supply and the other is the positioning of the conduit for it to do its function of transport very effectively. So for that, the first point being the anastomosis at the neck. The pharyngocolic anastomosis should be done with interrupted non-absorbable suture end-to-side or side-to-side fashion. We did in a side-to-side fashion with interrupted 4-row Prolene, the colon with the pharynx. And the next thing being to reduce the redundancy of colon, so that to reduce the stagnation of food in the colonic conduit. The colon is straightened a little bit and the colon is being fixed at one side in the left crus of the diaphragm. The third point being bringing the colon of the distal end and doing a posterior anastomosis to the stomach. So that one good thing is we usually take 1/3 distance from the fundus and do an anastomosis in the posterior part of the stomach, doing a gastrocolic anastomosis. This fundus will form a flap valve mechanism preventing regurgitation. The other thing to be kept in mind is to avoid doing pyloroplasty that may increase the bile reflex. So after the surgery ended successfully, like the patient was taken up to the post-operative ICU. Patient responded well. She was kept on a neck drain, a Jackson Pratt drain just near the conduit, and an abdominal drain. The drains were technically serous from day 1 and 2. She was allowed oral sips from day 1 in the sitting posture, but not completely. From day 2-3, the sips was increased gradually and she was advanced to liquids. However, she had symptoms of aspiration on and off post-op periods, so we didn't force her to take much. We advised her to take liquids, whatever she could, in sitting posture only. We did the swallow study that was okay, allowing good flow of contrast down. So we started her on a small quantity of soft diet, which she was tolerating. And we also were supplementing the FJ feeds as she was nutritionally deficient. And she was discharged on post-operative day 15. We all thought that this was the happy ending for the patient, that she started eating well. But again, she came in 1 week to the department for review. But there was still dysphagia persistent. Now we were in the thinking that why the patients should still have dysphagia. Is there anything to be done with the anastomosis? Was there any anastomotic stricture, or was there anything else that is causing her dysphagia? Was our main concern. Over dysphagia, she also had recurrent chest infection due to aspiration, and the main concern being the dysphagia. So again, starting from the investigation 1, we went again doing the OGD-scopy. The OGD-scopy done in June 2020. The scope passed through the neoesophagus, and for our luck, actually, the anastomosis was good. The scope passed into the anastomosis very freely. There was no anastomotic stricture, though we thought like. But there was full of undigested food collected in the conduit just at the level of the sternoclavicular joint. They suctioned out all the contents as it may cause the aspiration. Crossed anastomotic site easily, but there was difficulty in passing behind the region of sternoclavicular joint. So this was the picture of swallow study that was taken in end of May, around June, where this was the manubrium sterni and this was the clavicle. So while she was swallowing, there was the collection of food particles just here. It was not passing freely, but liquids was passing freely down. So it was typically the pictogram like this. The clavicle and the manubrium sterni was obstructing mechanically this colonic conduit. So again, we spoke with the patient and bystander saying that there is a mechanical obstruction to the conduit, so we'll go in for another surgery. Though it was very distressing for the patient, we convinced her that we may provide her a good quality of life after this surgery. So we took her for clavicle excision, the medial part of the manubrium with the medial, the lateral side of the manubrium with medial part of the clavicle was excised. We took much caution to preserve the costoclavicular ligament to avoid instability of the clavicle in the medial end. Once this was released, it was like opening up the thoracic inlet syndrome. The condyle became very free. After the surgery, she had a good outcome. Post-op period, we again did the swallow study in day 5. That swallow study showed well flow of the contrast even below the previous obstruction. So after that, the patient had a happy ending, she was able to tolerate food. She is taking whatever she likes. As of now, she is taking soft food, but we believe that she will be taking more food further. She has started gaining weight further. We have stopped giving FJ feeds and we have removed the FJ tube. And she's now leading a happy life, giving a happy ending. This is the happy ending for the patient. Our presentation continues. On discussion part, what is this esophagus desiccans superficialis? This is a rare desquamatic benign condition. It was first coined by Rosenberg in 1892 and its incidence is 0.03% in endoscopies. It is also called sloughing esophagitis or esophageal cast. So how does the patient get EDS? It is usually idiopathic, may be associated with some autoimmune disorders like pemphigus vulgaris, bullous pemphigoid or celiac disease. Some literature say it is associated with medications like SSRI, bisphosphonates, NSAID, and doxycycline. But some other literature denies that there's no association between medications. It is just a confounding thing. There is also a risk factor of physical trauma, smoking, chemical returns, and immunosuppression that may lead on that the patient may develop this esophagitis desiccans superficialis. So actually speaking, the direct mechanism of the esophageal injury in EDS remains unclear. The only thing, as it is associated with some autoimmune disorders like bullous pemphigoid and pemphigus vulgaris, the literature says in terms of the lesions the lesions affect, that is the immune system affects the squamous epithelial areas like skin and the esophagus more commonly. And the diagnostic criteria for EDS have also not been established. So the pathophysiology starts with low-grade esophagitis at distal end of esophagus that is followed by proliferation of the epithelial layer and degeneration of epidermoid layer, which presents with dysphagia, odynophagia, heartburn, expectoration of slough, bloody mucosa, and sore throat. There may be epigastric pain, nausea, vomiting, and retrosternal chest pain. So when do we suspect esophagitis desiccans superficialis is when we see typical features of OGD and histopathological features. But it is most important to rule out true infection of esophageal dysplasia or malignancy in such cases of suspicion. The endoscopic features being single or multiple white patches of peeling mucosa, strips of sloughed mucosa, diffuse sloughing of entire mucosa. There may be bullae epithelial clefting. There may be vertical fissures, circumferential cracks, webs and strictures. So histopathological evaluation shows intraepithelial splitting, which causes detachment of superficial squamous epithelium and parakeratosis, resulting in a two-toned appearance of squamous layers. So it is very important to differentiate from the other esophageal strictures caused by candidiasis, GERD, corrosive injury, lichen planus, herpes, celiac disease, and malignancy, which is usually confused with EDS. So the management, as per literature, there are only few evidences on protocolized management for EDS because the incidence of this case is very rare. The usual thing, it subsides with underlying treating the underlying condition. It usually occurs in old age people as per literature. Steroids is useful when it is associated with autoimmune skin lesions, but in our patients, steroids didn't much help our patient. Next being acid suppression and discontinuation of precipitating medication may also improve the condition. If all these fails, then endoscopic management of stricture with dilatation. When dilatation also fails, then surgery is the only resort to palliate the patient with a good quality of life. So post-operatively, we face complication of a mechanical obstruction from the mechanical obstruction by the clavicle after the conduit placement. The other common complications being early complications being the leak, necrosis, pneumo, hemothorax, and the late complications being stricture, peptic ulcer, and obstruction in the aorta. So when do we opt for a clavicle head excision in such sort of cases with mechanical obstruction? Or when should we think that intra-op only we should go ahead with clavicle resection is when the patient is very thin built, and when we are choosing a substernal route, there may be a mechanical obstruction as the colonic conduit is a big conduit to be in that place. So widening the thoracic inlet may be a good idea even at the first time. So this mechanical obstruction may lead to conduit compression, mechanical ischemia causing conduit necrosis. So thinking of concluding this speech, where all we could have rethought about treating this patient in the way we have treated, like initially compliance to steroids. This patient couldn't maintain a good compliance to steroids, but even when she was on steroids, she was not responding to the dysphagic symptoms. She responded only to the skin lesion symptoms. Another thing for a 35-year-old lady, when she first presented, putting her on steroids lifelong for the remaining of her life would be much difficult just to palliate her dysphagic symptoms. So the next being living with FJ. If it was an older patient, some 80, 90 years old, then living with FJ is okay. But this patient was young, just 45, 46 years. She had a very distressing quality of life that she could not eat whatever she likes. So that also is not an option. So what we went up with surgery was a good idea for this patient. Next thing was choosing a posterior mediastinal route. Thinking that this is a benign disease and we could have gone ahead with doing an esophagectomy, pulling up the stomach as a conduit, is a nice idea, but we rethought it multiple times. This patient, the problem was there was multiple esophageal dilatation and strictures, which would have made the esophagectomy very difficult. And one more thing, the patient was extremely thin and undernourished because of prolonged dysphagia. So it was wiser that we took a different route so that we could give a better prognosis. What about other conduits? Other conduits, the thing is, initially we thought of this too, placing a stomach, but it was a very high anastomosis. Bringing up the stomach in the substernal route up to the pharyngocolic anastomosis, pharyngeal anastomosis would have been extremely difficult. So the colonic conduit also was the better option for this patient. Last being clavicle excision at the first sitting. This we could have done as the patient was, but we thought that while placing the conduit, it was well sitting and the flow of the food, we thought that the flow of food would be normal for this patient too. But to our thinking, it became a wrong that there was mechanical obstruction due to the clavicle. So we were supposed to do a clavicle excision in the second sitting. So maybe in the next patient, I'll think of doing the clavicle excision at the first sitting only if the patient is too thin and there will be a significant thoracic inlet compression for the conduit after doing the surgery. So the take-home message of this disease is esophagitis desiccans superficialis is a rare desquamative esophagitis. Its common association are usually autoimmune or idiopathic. When to think of EDS is just when doing along with the clinical history with endoscopic findings and histopathology findings. The treatment basically being steroids, but if steroid fails, then endoscopic management. If endoscopic management too fails, then we'll need for surgical intervention to give the patient a better quality of life. Thank you.
Yeah, Matthew have You exposed the topic very well. And few questions. In the initial days, have you had any definite diagnosis in this patient?
Actually, that is the 2010 progress note. When I looked up, they couldn't make a primary diagnosis because the initial OGD-scopy didn't show much sloughing of the esophagus. There was, as I mentioned, there was just a peeling of mucosa when they gave some pressure over the esophagus. Otherwise, they couldn't get any obvious findings in 2010. And the biopsy was also not reported to have any neutrophilic infiltration or some parakeratosis of the mucosal sloughing or anything. Maybe it was a non-representative tissue, probably. So at 2010, as such, I reviewed the records available. They couldn't make a proper diagnosis. And the patient, after the first dilatation, didn't return back till 2014. 2014 was the time when they admitted the patient and they have done the endoscopy as there was skin lesions also. So at 2014 only, I think there was a perfect diagnosis of EDS.
Because if it is EDS, actually, even without a biopsy, it is possible to diagnose because endoscopy findings are very
Yes.
typical. In most of the cases, without an endoscopic biopsy, we will be able to make a conclusion.
This
But
endoscopic picture also
also-
is a file image. I couldn't retrieve the picture from 2014 or 2010 endoscopy. The system didn't store. System stored only the barium swallow studies.
Okay, and in this barium, we can see two strictures. And how many attempts of dilatation was tried? And have you not thought about keeping a stent inside?
As per the notes, it was a successful dilatation using a controlled radial expansion balloon, which was dilated up to 12 millimeters. And after that, one follow-up alone, when she came to collect the biopsy report, the patient has told that she has significant improvement in symptoms.
Okay, it's a long topic, so I'll ask few questions and then I'll open it to the floor. And you were talking about the selection of the conduit.
Yeah.
You have not selected stomach. What are the reason?
What is the reason to select the colon or what?
You have not selected a stomach as a conduit. Why?
Yeah, sir. Actually, the stricture was almost very high, and we didn't plan for a esophagectomy because of multiple reasons which I described. So bringing up the stomach conduit so high would have been very difficult for this patient. So probably
Is there anything expected in the stomach because it's a normal stomach and
actually it was a normal stomach, sir. By all endoscopy findings, the esophagogastric junction, the stomach and the duodenum was absolutely normal. There was no finding in the stomach.
And that barium didn't show anything in the
Barium also didn't show anything in the stomach. Even in the,
region is normal.
yes, sir. Yeah.
So naturally, stomach would have been the first conduit, right? And later you said that there was on opening the neck, you have found stricture at the site of the cervical region, right?
No, sir. It was a previous stricture. It was not a new finding. It was the previous stricture that we expected when we opened the neck. That's it.
Okay. Normally, when we take a colon conduit, one of the most important factor responsible for its viability is the venous drainage.
Yeah.
If we pull the colon towards the neck,
Yes.
there is a possibility for venous thrombosis, and that can kill the conduit.
Conduit.
Always you should push the conduit towards the neck and should be
Should not pull the conduit.
regarding the vascularity. Vascularity in the sense arterial pulsation will be there, but the venous drainage will be lost, and that can actually necrose the colon. And what I have found is that if 20% of the colon conduit is likely to fail in the sense it can be a partly it can fail or it can completely fail because mainly we we use the colon conduit for stricture esophagus, maybe for alkali induced or acid induced, and it is going to be a high stricture, and in most of the cases we will be doing a pharyngocolic anastomosis, and that too through the substernal route where we require more length of colon. And so the possibility for anastomotic failures and related complications are high when we take colon, but stomach, definitely the vascularity can be maintained very well, and the chance for leak and all those related complications are extremely less. I think there are a lot of questions to come. I open the topic for discussion from the floor. Sudhir, any comments from your side?
Please unmute before speaking.
Yes, presented well. Went on okay. Actually, the thing is that we have initially planned for a pharyngocoloplasty because the stricture was from the upper airway sphincter onwards, because all the squamous epithelium will get affected by this. So we can't use the stomach. And one more, it's a benign condition, so colon would be the better choice. And we were not planning to do a esophagectomy because last two dilatation were very difficult, and there was a suspicion that whether there's a perforation also. So we couldn't do any esophagectomy. We know that patient might need, because those strictures there, if it progresses, then it can produce something like a mucociliary. So she might require further follow-up. But I don't know whether what is the natural history of esophageal superficialis dissecans, because this is the first case that actually we deal. Any other senior faculty have any other experience with this kind of disease, esophageal superficialis dissecans? Deepak, hi.
Yeah, so generally it is said that it involves the area below the carina and the lower esophagus is involved. Middle esophagus and lower esophagus is involved. And proximal esophageal involvement is less in pemphigus.
Everywhere there's squamous cell epithelium, it can get affected. That's the problem. So, so the whole of the esophagus can be affected. Squamous epithelium is, that's why the patient has pemphigus of the skin also. It can get affected. And this patient also, the whole of the esophagus was affected.
Yeah, may I ask a question? Hello?
Yeah, Ramesh?
Yeah, it's a rare case. I don't have any experience of managing this patient. I was wondering, was a covered metallic stent was thought of an option for management in some point of time because she was not responding to esophageal dilatation regularly. Was that an option at some point of time, especially when her BMI was very low?
Thing is that actually it was 2016 to 19. So early at that time, whether there is covered removable esophageal stents were available itself, we don't know. 2016 to 14 to 16 and all. Yeah, of course, 2019 it could be, but what's the end point? The patient continues to have this, even if you remove it also, it can again have slough off. So
there are two structures, I think. And
yeah,
there are two structures.
But a long covered stent, as Prakash was saying, a long covered stent may be covering both these strictures. But when you remove it, again, you can, the natural history would progress, will still be there. So, because she's having it for the last so many years.
Can I, Dr. Srijan, can I make a
Yeah, please.
comment? Nice presentation, Matthews. In the postoperative period, the block, the hold up at the sternoclavicular joint level, was it not seen in the initial contrast study in the postoperative period, Matthews?
So initial contrast study we did with the contrast liquids alone. That time there was a flow of contrast. So we thought
there was no hold up at all.
There was some hold up, but we didn't think of that way. We thought we would wait for some time so that it will improve on its own, as the flow was good with the contrast.
And the other thing is that introp, in spite of that narrow sternoclavicular thoracic inlet, was there no venous congestion of the tip of the conduit? Introp, you usually wait for some time.
Yes, sir.
While doing the anastomosis. Was there no congestion at all?
There was no much congestion prompting us that we should not do the anastomosis or anything.
Yeah.
It looked okay.
Yeah, Ramesh, he said the anastomosis worked well and the patient was discharged on 15th day. But one minor modification where we can do at the root of the neck is we can divide the sternothyroid and the sternohyoid so that the pressure exerted by these two muscles to the colon can be very much reduced by doing that procedure.
Yeah, as a routine,
Yeah.
That's what you mean.
Yes.
As a routine, I would say that we have to exercise the sternoclavicular. We have done many esophageal colonoplasty for, as Srijay was saying, for the corrosive strictures. We never exercise the sternoclavicular joint. So we thought that actually that should be okay. So there are so many surgeons doing routine excision of the sternoclavicular joint, and even in the textbook it is described like that. Maybe she was so thin, her BMI was very, very low. So that could be another reason which resulted in an obstruction.
No,
can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
Matthew, nice presentation. Is there any chance of a malignancy or in the remnant esophagus that we have left?
Yeah.
And second question, is there any indications where we can have a prophylactic clavicular excision? Is there something like that?
To answer the first question, sir, the chance of malignancy literature-wise, the EDS is a very rare disease. Till now, they have not reported any malignancy occurring in the EDS. And most of the literature papers show the patients more than 70 years. So they don't have much follow-up to say whether they develop malignancy or not. This patient has developed the disease very, very early. Maybe we need to follow up this case and check whether she's developing malignancy or not. Till now, she hasn't got any evidence of malignancy anywhere.
So if it's a lichen planus involving the esophagus, actually it's a premalignant condition and possibility of developing is high. But emphagus actually it is not there. And another point to add regarding the sternoclavicular joint excision or the clavicular head excision is that there are some surgeons who are routinely using right colon as the conduit. And there are some surgeons who are using left colon as the conduit. The left colon size or the diameter is almost equivalent to esophagus or maybe a bit more than that. But the right colon, when we know that the mesocolic fat is more and the cecum is larger, and it is very difficult for in some patients to pull the cecum and the right colon through the sternoclavicular area, where you may require excision of manubrium sterni or clavicular head at the time of surgery itself, not at a later date. But left side, it is not very common.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Few people raised the hands.
Yeah, Madhu.
Sir, can I have a question, please?
Yes, take 1 second. Madhu, please go ahead.
I just want two doubts, sir. One is regarding the malignant potential, which has already been answered. The other question is, I don't have much experience in benign things. In a benign condition, when you have a stomach over there, is the colonic conduit better conduit than the stomach in benign condition? Because we all know that in a malignant situation, we always use the stomach as first conduit. So it's a different when dealing with benign conditions. That's first question. Second question, the rationale of not having done the esophagectomy. Is it necessary to mobilize the esophagus, or would just a stripping be good enough in terms of this being a benign condition?
Yeah, Madhu, one thing is that if stomach is available always, stomach is the best conduit. And
even in benign, sir?
Yes, benign also it is the best conduit. And if stomach is not available, you can go for colon. And second one, what is the second question?
Can you just strip off the esophagus, because you're not dealing with a malignant condition? Just strip off the esophagus so you avoid the dissection part.
So Sudhir and Matthews were talking about the repeated dilatation and the problem, because when we repeatedly dilate, the possibility for local inflammation is high, and stripping may not be a safe procedure to undergo. Yeah, Siddiq, please go ahead. Siddiq Fadul.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you very much for this very, very useful presentation and interesting. My question is that for this very rare disease, and there is a possibility of being an autoimmune process, could it be there any chance for the disease to recur in the conduit? And if this is possible, for how long should we follow up the patient to tell him that now you are safe and it's not the time for recurrence is past already?
Actually, this disease process occurs mostly in the squamous epithelium. That this colonic conduit doesn't have squamous epithelium, we expect that disease doesn't occur in the conduit. We are not so sure because no literature evidence is there. And sorry, what was your second question? I couldn't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Shubhlal sir?
Hello. Hear me?
Yeah, you can.
Oh. Okay.
Sir, we can hear you. Voice is breaking.
Now, I was about to ask about the use of body passivity. And I usually do the anastomosis on the right side of the neck. How many of you are doing the anastomosis on the right side? Yes, no. The right column bringing into the neck is not very difficult for me. I don't know if you can
So your voice was breaking. So you take the right column based on the middle colic artery, sir?
Sir, it's left, I think. I think the connection has got disconnected.
Right colon, sometimes we get problems because of the bulkiness of the cecum and the mesocolic fat. Otherwise, in many cases, we will be able to do it. But right side anastomosis, I don't know how many surgeons does the anastomosis on the right side of the neck.
So, sir, I have done only right colons. Numbers may not be big. It's all malignancies. I have done only right colons for coloplasty. But then I do the anastomosis with the terminal ileum, not with the cecum. So I take a bit of the terminal ileum also. As Srijan sir said, that bulk of the cecum is a bit of a problem. But I have been trained to do right side, where I have not seen left side. That's why I continue doing right side.
Shubhlal sir, there was some connectivity problem, so your voice was breaking and we were not able to listen to you properly.
Hi, can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Madhu. Hi.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hi.
Hi. Why you are using right colon? Why not the stomach?
No, always stomach, sir. I use only right colon in situations where the stomach was not good enough, or there is extensive disease over the lesser curvature, which makes stomach impossible to be taken into the neck.
Okay, so
otherwise, I will use another. Pardon, sir?
No, those cases where stomach is not possible, you are talking about.
So wherever possible, stomach, early stomach, and when possible, if it is not coming to the neck, we have shifted out IVLU. If it can reach into the thorax, that's another option. If both these options are not possible, only we go for a total gastrectomy with total esophagectomy with a colonic interposition. And in those situations, I have only taken right colon. And no reason for that, because I have been trained only to do right-sided colons. That's why I do right colons. Last time we were discussing Srijan sir, I need to go to him and see how a left colon is taken. That's why I do right side. Only in cases where the total esophagectomy, total gastrectomy. That's rare in malignancies.
Now, in that case, we will be taking the colonic conduit through the not through the retrosternal route. No.
No. It through the orthotopic. Retroperitoneal.
Usual the esophagectomy and posterior mediastinum. You do it based on the middle colic artery.
Yes, sir.
That's another option. And the thing is that when you take the ileum, distal ileum, it matches with the esophagus, and the anastomosis may be okay.
And you can do hands-on end-to-end anastomosis. But the only problem is you'll have to push in that sponge holding forceps and just break up the ileocecal valve. Otherwise, that may sometime produce a hold up of the foot particle. So whatever we do is just pass on the sponge folding forceps through that opening and just dilate it.
The ileocecal valve will be better because it prevents the reflux. Ileocecal valve actually facilitates the flow of fluid from the ileum to the cecum. So no need to disrupt that valve because even the flow is normal. So I don't know
I
whether
do that because of fear, sir. Because I'm not just because in case it becomes a problem, then stuck. So that's why it's not because of any previous experience of having hold up. Just do it off routine. That's all, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Arun, please.
Sudhir sir, Srijan sir, all senior teachers. Can you tell us some tricks to decrease the incidence of recurrent laryngeal nerve paresis and palsy in esophageal surgery?
Yeah, Arun, the best technique is that in every case, you should identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve. And it is very easy to identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve. It will be in the tracheoesophageal groove. And another problem is when you take the esophagus from the cervical region, sometimes you can lift the recurrent laryngeal nerve from the other side also. Opposite side recurrent laryngeal also can be taken to your side. But on the same side, suppose you are operating on the left side. Once you open the tracheoesophageal area, then you will be able to clearly see the recurrent laryngeal nerve running on the tracheoesophageal groove, and you can isolate that, and excluding that, you can pull the esophagus with, or you can hook the esophagus with a right angle, and then you can start operating. The tip is that it will be there in the tracheoesophageal groove because left recurrent laryngeal has got a very constant force, and it is not like the right one, which can be there in the visceral compartment. So always on the left side, you will be able to see it in the tracheoesophageal groove, and you can safeguard this.
Sir, that is regarding the neck dissection aspect. Suppose if it is a transhiatal esophageectomy, what about chance of injuries from below?
No, below it is very unlikely because in transhiatal esophagectomy, the rule is you stay close to the esophagus, you hug the esophagus and move. You don't move anywhere else. And the pattern, it is something like this. I don't know whether you will be able to see.
Yes.
My hand you can see.
Okay.
And this is the esophagus. When you dissect it, you above or the anterior aspect, you can dissect it like this. And if it is on the posterior side, your finger should be coming from under surface, hugging the esophagus. So never ever move away from the esophagus, or you can flex onto the esophagus, but not an extension maneuver is done on the esophagus. I don't know whether you can understand what I say. The only thing is that you hug the esophagus and move on. And you are not attempting to remove the lymph nodes. You are not attempting to remove anything. You are not addressing the lymph node dissection in transhiatal esophagectomy. So stay close, and you are not going to injure the recurrent laryngeal nerve at all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
One more thing, Arun, actually, when you do a thoracic scopic surgery, if you're doing it, the dissection of the esophagus, you can dissect it high up, maybe into the neck itself. Till the inferior thyroid artery, you can dissect the neck from the thorax. If you do that, when you expose the neck, then hooking of the esophagus from the neck becomes very easy. As Srijan was saying, you have to identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve and preserve it. And when you hook it onto the right side, recurrent laryngeal nerve might come in your hand, in your fingers, because you are not seeing it. Okay. So for that, you have to dissect it high up, go again high into the neck, so that the hooking of the esophagus, encircling the esophagus after exposing the neck would be much more easier. And another thing is that actually, as Srijan was saying, stay close to the esophagus, at least in the upper part. Lower mediastinum, maybe you may be able to dissect the nodes and all. But when you do the transhiatal dissection, always push onto the esophagus. Your fingers will be always on the esophagus, not away from there. so that these esophagus vein injury, nerve injury, tracheal injury, more importantly, can be avoided.
Thank you. Thank you,
I
sir.
have a question to Matthews. Your patient went home on 15th day without complications, right? Suppose the patient had a colon conduit necrosis, what would have been your next option? Because we cannot predict that the colon or the stomach, which is kept in the substernal area, reaching high up in the neck, would stay in the neck properly.
Know whether Matthew will be able to answer that.
No, I just asked a question. That's all.
Matthew, anyway, what your
I'll
thought,
answer that.
Matthews?
Just to provoke Matthew, that's all.
Good. Matthews is not there.
What happened?
Poor connection saved him.
I think he's already disconnected the conduit.
He was asking me whether people will ask you questions as in examination. Anyway, this is an examination question. You can answer that. Matthew.
He's disconnected the conduit.
Disconnected already.
Sorry, Matthew is here. I think he's here. Okay, he can answer.
System ended it there, sir.
Matthew, you can answer. I can sit here. No problem. Thank you, sir.
Matthew, did you hear the question?
Yeah, sir. Yeah. While answering, it got stuck. Maybe if it was a colonic conduit necrosis, then we would have waited to know whether it was a complete necrosis or just the anastomotic area which got necrosed.
So what are you going to do if you...
Necrosis of colonic
No,
conduit, sir.
you don't know whether it is complete or partial. What will be
if the patient is not frankly septic, I will wait for some time. I'll open up the neck sutures and manage conservatively. If she goes for frank sepsis or anything, then I have to go re-explore, debride out the tissues, whichever is neck.
The problem is sometimes you will find blackish fluid coming from the neck. So in that case, you should suspect necrosis of the conduit.
Yes.
So what are you going to do then? Without any anesthesia, you can remove the sutures, few sutures. Then you are going to see a black area in the neck. So now you suspect you are not able to see any pink area in the neck at all. So you suspect necrosis, extensive necrosis downwards. So then you will have to see the abdomen. So when you see the abdomen, probably the whole thing would have gone. Or if it is partial, you can close it at that point and you can leave it there. But if it is complete, you will have to take it out. Otherwise, patient is going to develop sepsis. So immediately you explore the abdomen, take out the conduit, close it there. And what is the next option? You have only stomach. So always in a patient who is having a stricture esophagus, whether it is alkali or acid related strictures, we may not be able to use the posterior mediastinum. We are not going to remove the esophagus, and we will be placing the conduit in the substernal area. So the stomach also may be strictured, because in most of the cases, stomach also involves in this caustic poisoning. So most of the time, when there is a colonic necrosis, it's going to be an end procedure. And you can talk about a lot of things on the stage, but for the patient, it is going to be a very difficult problem, because you can talk about sternomastoid flap, you can talk about skin flaps, you can talk about many things, but for the patient, what you can do is only a feeding jejunostomy.
Yeah.
In this case, still the stomach conduit is an option.
Because he said there was a stricture in the cervical area. So always when there is a possibility of a stricture, and Sudhir was talking about the involvement of the entire esophagus, in that case, stomach is not an option. We will have to anastomose the pharyngeal area. Maybe we can use that, but the only thing is that the lower esophagus has to be tight. Then we have to divide the lower esophagus, then only we can take the stomach above. Or when we tie the lower esophagus, the problem is patient can develop mucocele. Definitely that patient will develop mucocele in future.
Yeah, we can do something. Actually, Stomach, I'm not yet sure, because if you're taking through the posterior mediastinum, the stomach will not reach the neck. Even otherwise, when you take through native posterior mediastinum, stomach just reaches the neck, may not reach the pharynx. And if it's the retrosternal, again, the route will be a bit more longer. So stomach would be a problem. And this is a Kaestner procedure, something like that. No? When you want to ligate the lower end of the esophagus, then you have to anastomose that to a jejunal loop. Or else, as Srija was saying, there could be mucociliary developments. You can't close it like that. You have to anastomose that esophagus to a loop of a rule limb of jejunal muscle.
Any other questions from the floor? Deepak, Prasad, Prakash, Guruvela sir.
So there are a few questions in chat box.
Jane. Hello.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
I had a similar issue, treated in the similar way, but ended up not happily like this. It was a mentally retarded girl, around 30, 32, who consumed Harpic. Harpic, you know, is a very corrosive alkali. She had extensive esophageal necrosis, and the gastroesophageal junction up to that was necrosed and scarred. And so the initial surgery was a feeding genioscopy. Then almost a year we decided to do something. It was impossible to put even a guide wire to pass a CRE balloon to do the dilatation. It was 20 years ago. So we never had any stents or anything, even if we could manage to dilate it. Then finally we decided to take colon as similar case. In fact, as you rightly commented, venous obstruction, venous occlusion is a problem. So we thought we will do an alternate steps. That time Subramania Iyer was here. So I got his help. A microvascular anastomosis to neck vessel also was done. But the problem was we got this block at the sternocleidomastoid sternal level. But this proceeding for anything again was a difficult task. And finally, we had to leave her alone. She lived with the stricture and lived with the feeding genioscopy her entire life. I had follow-up for a year, then telephonic contact for a couple of years, and then lost follow-up. So I think still that early division or elective division of that area should be of a great help.
True. Yeah, actually, that's not a very major procedure. Just nibbling of
not a major procedure.
Sternoclavicular joint. We never do that, but I think it's quite a good option because it's not a very difficult. It won't take much time. You can just nibble off the manubrium sternae, the medial part.
I was not aware of this method.
Agree. Yeah, here we also were not very aware of it. Yeah, true. Agree.
Yeah, any comments from Prathapan, Ramesh? Joshi, any more? അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ അത് ക്ലോസ് ചെയ്യാല്ലേ സുധീർ?
Yeah.
It was a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, if they
and
we can proceed, we can close discussion.
Yeah, excellent presentation, and I congratulate the ASGK office bearers for this wonderful occasion, especially for the PGs. Is the best option to present themselves, and I think they should continue. And much I expected much more participants. That's the only thing. It's the best option for PGs to present themselves and expose themselves to a wide range of audience.
Excellent presentation, Matthews and Sudhir and team. Really enjoyed. Thank you very much for allowing me to moderate this session. Back to the president. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Srijan, for the good moderation. It was a rare case and good discussion. I think shall I invite Arun to give details of the question that he had put up. Arun?
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm just opening the question again. The winner has already been selected. But any comments? There were at least 2 or 3 correct answers as personal message. 2 findings, 2 observations in this CT. Pidambaran, can you see the CT?
Yeah.
Definitely, it's an arterial reconstruction of the foregut and midgut vessels. Anything?
The celiac artery is originating at trifurcation.
Excellent. So that's an important finding. See, this is important. If we have the facility, we should utilize it. The message is, before operating a stomach for a D2 gastrectomy, if we have a good quality CT scan, check for the arterial anatomy. Very rarely there can be, this is actually one of the rare anomalies, the common hepatic, the left gastric as well as the splenic, having 3 separate origins from the aorta. There is absence of the common celiac trunk in this case. You can see the superior mesenteric artery lower down and the both renal arteries. Observation, any 2 clip-like structures very close to right hepatic artery. So the most likely the previous surgery would have been the most common laparoscopic cholecystectomy. The 2 clips, laparoscopic cholecystectomy patient under in the past, and this is rare, but such anatomical details are so important when we do a D2 gastrectomy. Definitely we will be searching for the left gastric to ligate it very close to its origin. Sometimes it can be directly from the aorta. Don't mistake it as a celiac origin. And the winner is, any guesses? Chief of Gastrosurgery in Aster Medicity Kochi, Dr. K. Prakash. Congratulations, sir. And the prizes will be given by Dr. Joshi John and Dr. Ramachandran Menon, the President and Secretary of ASGK Kerala. Thank you, sir.
Virtual prize.
Thank you so much, sir. Congratulations, Dr. K. Prakash, who is the winner for today.
Price Thailand like Aicha Pono. Oh. Flight ticket there.
Back to Dr. Pidambaran, Academic Coordinator.
Murali is there? Murali online ഉണ്ടല്ലോ.
ദീപക്, എന്തുണ്ട് വിശേഷം അവിടെ? ഹായ് ദീപക്.
ഹായ്.
എന്തുണ്ട് വിശേഷം? എങ്ങനെയുണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ?
ഇവിടെ ഇവിടെ ഇപ്പൊ സ്റ്റോമാണ്, ഈ കൊടുങ്കാറ്റ്.
ഓ ആണോ?
ഹോസ്പിറ്റൽ ഹോളിഡേ. അപ്പൊ OP ഒന്നുമില്ല, OP ഒക്കെ ക്യാൻസൽ.
അപ്പൊ നിങ്ങൾ എന്താ അവിടെ പോയി ചെയ്യുന്നത്?
ഞാൻ രാവിലെ ഒന്ന് വീട്ടിലിരുന്നൊന്നും ചെയ്യാനില്ല.
Now
10:45 മോർണിംഗ്.
ഡ്രസ്സൊക്കെ ഇട്ടേക്കുന്നല്ലോ.
ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ നിന്ന് വരുമ്പോ മാറ്റാം.
ഇങ്ങനത്തെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ചോദിക്കാൻ പാടില്ല.
മധു, ഒരുമാതിരി നമ്മുടെ വീട്ടില് ബെറ്റർ ഹാഫിന്റെ സംസാരം പോലെയാണല്ലോ.
തൊപ്പി മാസ്ക് ഒക്കെ ഡോട്ടി ഡ്രസ് ഇട്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ പണിയില്ലെന്ന് പറയുന്നു.
ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിലാണ്. ഇല്ല, വീട്ടില് കറണ്ട് ഇല്ല. ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ ഇവിടെ ഫുൾ സ്റ്റോമാണ്, വെള്ളപ്പൊക്കം. വീട്ടിൽ കറണ്ട് ഇല്ല. അപ്പൊ ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ നിന്ന് താമസം.
ദീപകിനെ കണ്ടിട്ട്
Can you?
Actually, the flyer was prepared by Murali.
The presentation was very good, really good, and very crisp. It was excellent, no doubt.
Prakash, അത് രമേഷ്, അത് നിങ്ങൾ ചാറ്റ് ബോക്സ് എഴുതുന്നത് നിങ്ങളുടെ വോയിസ് വളരെയധികം പീപ്പിൾ ആണ്. ശാസ്ത്രിയിൽ പോലെ ഇരിക്കുന്നതാണ് പറഞ്ഞത്. ദീപക്, നിങ്ങൾ കാണാനാണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. അങ്ങനെയാണോ പറഞ്ഞത്?
അല്ല സാറേ, ഒരു കൊറിയൻ സർജൻ.
അതെ
ശാസ്ത്രിലാണ്.
So
Sadiq, one Sadiq is there. No, Sadiq is from. I think I am meeting for the first time.
Siddiq Fadul. Hi, doctor.
Hi, Siddiq.
Yes, sir.
Please introduce yourself. We are seeing you for the first time.
Yeah. First of all, greetings. It's the first time to attend this meeting with you. I'm from Sudan, now working in Saudi Arabia, in a very remote hospital. I mean, tertiary hospital. But the most of the volume of our cases is general surgery, is not specific esophageal surgery. So I got this link from one of my Indian colleagues. We are studying together to get the FRCS. So I'm very pleased to attend and to listen to this very useful and this very elaborating discussion. The moderator was generously leading the discussion, and he is commenting, enriching the topic. The topic is already rich, very rich and well presented, but his comments making it more rich and more rich. So I'm very pleased to be with you.
We are very happy to see you, get introduced to you, and yeah, it's good that you be here for many more such meetings. Greetings from India.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please do attend. This is our monthly meeting every
first Saturday
of every month. Usually it's almost a case-based discussion, a complicated case usually, and it's very useful for practicing surgeons as well as postgraduates.
Very good. I will send my email in the chat box.
Yeah, please share your number, WhatsApp number.
Yes.
Also.
Yes, I will share my WhatsApp number and my email for further contact and for further communication. Thank you very much for this one. It's my honor to have this chance. Okay, let me before ending I will share my WhatsApp number. Let me do that one right now.
The concluding remarks, I think, should be from Murali.
Hello. Yeah, it was a very excellent presentation. I have to congratulate the speaker and the mentor, and also moderator sir. Everyone has done, and everyone has participated nicely. And thank you everyone for giving me also an opportunity to help in this thing. Thank you, Dr. Pidambran sir, Dr. Ramendran sir, and Joshi sir.
എന്തുകൊണ്ടോ?
And over to Dr. Pidambran.
Nothing much to say. It was wonderful discussion, and especially I want to say that the presenter had presented in a very good way, and we didn't feel that it was a PG presentation. It was like a experienced presenter.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Srijayan sir, for coordinating wonderfully. going the discussion in a very fruitful manner. And those who are willing to present any case, please send your expressions in WhatsApp privately or group, whatever it is.
Shall we say good night? Bye bye.
Good night. Bye bye. See you.
Good night. Good night.
Okay,
See you next.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good night.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Good night.
Goodbye, Fadi. Fadul, yeah, bye-bye.
Yeah. Good
See
night.
you all, see you all next month for Saturday.
Inshallah. Don't forget to add me to your groups and don't forget to send me your the link for that Zoom. I will be very happy to attend, inshallah. Again, thank you.
Yeah, we'll be sending it.
Deepak, stay safe. Storm okay, stay safe.
I think he has already left.
He left already. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.